Cursor finished a CLI task in 6.6 minutes, while Kimi Code took 23.8 minutes. That's 3.6 times faster on the same job. If you're running dozens of tasks a week, that gap adds up to real hours lost. Both tools are hot right now, so I'm comparing Kimi Code versus Cursor across column 5 categories: cost, benchmarks, speed, context, and deployment. But Kimi Code's raw API cost is dramatically cheaper per token, and the context window tests could change who you pick entirely. My name is Brian, and I'm in these tools 12 hours a day, so you don't have to be. Every number I'm about to give you traces back to official pricing pages, model cards, or independent press benchmarks. This one's for developers running agent workflows or heavy coding tasks where cost and speed actually hit your budget. Test 1. Cost. The day your usage bill comes in and you realize you blew through $60 in Cursor credits on a single refactor sprint, that stings. Entry tier is almost identical, $19 versus $20 a month. But the moment you go API first and start pumping millions of tokens through, the per token rate is what actually determines how much you pay. What surprised me here is how close the subscription tiers actually are. Kimi Code's Moderato plan is $19 a month. Cursor Pro is $20, basically the same. But I looked at the raw API rates, and Kimi Code is charging 0.85 per million input tokens and 4.0 per million output tokens. Cursor doesn't publish a standalone API rate at all. It's bundled into subscription credits, so you can't do a direct per token comparison. The honest caveat is that Cursor's credit system is more transparent about what you actually get per plan. $20 of credits on Pro, roughly $70 on Pro Plus. And that's a real thing. But if you're doing serious API volume, Kimi's 0.95 input rate is dramatically cheaper than anything Cursor's bundled model lets you infer. And that's the call that matters for high throughput work. Cost is a tie at the subscription level, $19 versus $20, and neither really pulled away on plans alone. Where Kimi Code wins is raw API economics, but since Cursor doesn't publish a comparable rate, we can't score a clean head-to-head. Scoreboard stays at 0 each, 1 tied. Test 2. Coding benchmark performance. The viewer objection I hear all the time is that benchmarks are just marketing, and look, that's fair. When you're picking a tool to write production code, though, a 10-point gap on a coding eval is the difference between a model that completes a complex function and one that hallucinates half of it. So I looked at what both sides actually publish. Kimi's K2.7 scores 62.0 on Kimi Code Bench v2, which is a big jump from 50.9 on the previous version. Cursor's top score on Cursor Bench 3.2 is 70.5, but that's using Claude Fable 5 Max, not a Cursor-owned model, and these are completely different evals, so you can't just line them up and call it a win. The caveat is real. These are vendor-run evals on different setups, so the 8.5-point gap is directional, not a clean apples-to-apples number. Cursor's top model configuration scores higher on its own eval. Kimi's K2.7 still trails, and neither benchmark is independently reproducible. So take both scores as a signal, not a verdict. The edge still goes to Cursor. Cursor takes coding benchmark performance. Kimi's K2.7 upgrade from 50.9 to 62.0 is a real improvement. But Cursor's top configuration still sits at 70.5, and that's the number on the board. Cursor leads 1-0 with 1 tie. Test 3. Speed. A solo dev shipping a feature on a Friday afternoon doesn't have 23 minutes to wait for a CLI task to finish. You lose your flow, you context switch, and you end up doing the work yourself anyway. Speed decides whether AI coding actually saves you time or just adds a new kind of waiting. The gap here is way bigger than I thought it would be. Independent press testing clocked Cursor's CLI at 6.6 minutes per task, and Kimi Code's CLI at 23.8 minutes on the same setup, which is Cursor finishing more than 3 times faster. Kimi does claim up to 100 tokens per second standard and around 180 on its high-speed tier, but those are vendor figures and the measured time per task tells a different story. Cursor wins speed, and it's not close. 6.6 minutes versus 23.8 minutes. Cursor is 3.6 times faster on measured CLI tasks, and Kimi's token per second claims just don't hold up when you look at actual task time. That puts Cursor ahead 2-0 with one tie still on the board. Alright, so Cursor is up 2-0 right now, but we still have context limits and deployment coming up. And those two tests are exactly where Kimi Code is supposed to shine. If you're running large code bases or agent pipelines with massive token counts, the context test could completely change the math on which tool actually fits your workload. Test 4. Context and output limits. The day you try to load a 200,000 token codebase into your AI tool and it just truncates half of it, you lose context on the exact functions that matter most. For large refactors or multi-file agent runs, context window size is the hard ceiling on what the model can actually reason about in one shot, and that's not an abstract spec concern. I looked at the specs, and Kimi Code's K2.7 comes in at 262,102 tokens, vendor specified and solid. Cursor's context is model dependent, running between 200K and 256K, depending on which model you route to, and then there's Kimi K3, which claims up to 1 million tokens. I couldn't find independent verification on that K3 figure, so treat it as a vendor claim for now. But even K2.7 alone beats Cursor's typical ceiling. Kimi Code takes context. At 262K tokens on K2.7, it beats Cursor's typical 200K to 256K range, and K3's 1M claim pushes it further if that holds up. Kimi gets on the board. Scoreboard is now Cursor 2, Kimi Code 1 with one tie. Test 5. Deployment and modality. So, 262K tokens on K.7 is the number that just won Kimi Code the context test. But now the question is how each tool actually fits into your workflow. A great model locked inside a CLI you hate using is still a bad day, and this test is about form factor, model routing, and what each tool can actually ingest. So here's what I found. Cursor is a full VS Code fork with visual diffs, inline completions, and multi-model routing. You can point it at Claude, GPT, Gemini, or custom models. Kimi Code ships as a CLI plus a VS Code extension, and K2.7 supports text, image, and video input via its MoonVT encoder, which Cursor doesn't advertise at all. Both have real strengths, just pointed in different directions. These two tools are genuinely shaped differently, so calling one better here is really about use case. The decisive call is this. If you want a GUI-first editor with visual diffs and the ability to swap models, Cursor is the clear pick. And if you're building agents or CLI pipelines and need multimodal input, Kimi Code does something. Cursor doesn't even try to do. Deployment and modality is a tie. Cursor's IDE depth is genuinely impressive, but Kimi's multimodal support and CLI flexibility make it a genuine split, different tools for different builders. Final scoreboard. Cursor 2, Kimi Code 1, 2 tied. Kimi Code wins on raw API cost. $0.95 per million input tokens is dramatically cheaper than Cursor's bundled credit model. It wins on context, with K2.7 at 262K tokens beating Cursor's typical 200K to 256K, and it's the only one of the two that handles image and video input natively, which matters for certain agent workflows. Cursor wins on measured speed. 6.6 minutes per task versus 23.8 minutes is a 3.6 times faster result on identical CLI setups. It wins on IDE integration with visual diffs and inline completions built in, and it wins on model flexibility because you can route to Claude, GPT, Gemini, or custom models so you're never locked into one vendor's output. For most people, Cursor is the pick. The cost gap is real, but Cursor's 3.6 times speed advantage on actual tasks is hard to argue with for day-to-day coding. Go Kimi Code only if you're running API-heavy agent pipelines, where that 0.95 per million token rate actually compounds into savings. Or you need a context window bigger than 256K. Speed wins most workdays. If you want to see how Kimi Code stacks up against another open source option, I did a full breakdown in Qwen 3 Coder versus Kimi Code, which open coder wins. It answers whether the free alternative is actually good enough for serious work, and the result is pretty interesting.